That was our initial goal. We essentially want the public to pay less margin to the investors, and the best way to do that would be to decrease the risk of the investors for their investment, which would be achieved through hard-coded delegates. But then we saw that the community was very much against that. And we said that, okay, looks like the community is reacting very strongly against this. Let's do opt-out, and let's essentially say the pay for success scheme means if we are successful, the success metric is people actually voting for us and using our wallet. And therefore the risk of the investors would increase, and therefore as a kind of middle ground, we decided to increase the return rate to the investors to 1.15 from 1.1, meaning from 10% to 15%. And that was our middle ground, which we proposed.
And how did the community take that?
It seems so far quite well, actually.
And could you give me your opinion on what you gathered was the main concern that the community expressed that moved you more in this direction?
To be honest, the majority of the comments were against it on principle rather than on a specific argument. So it was a bit difficult to make a decision based on that, just on the principles of some people. When we design software or any business model, we're very much don't look at ideology, right?
Sure.
The only ideology we kind of decided on at Bitsapphire is design for the tendency, right? If a system has an inbuilt tendency for whatever reason, then embrace it and design for it. That's actually pretty much what Master did with EPOS, right? You know that there's a centralization tendency, so let's embrace it and just put a cap of 101 delegates on it. That's designing for tendency. So our design for tendency in this case of the business model was, okay, let's do the hard-coded delegates, because if we don't do it, somebody is going to do it anyway, right? And why are they going to do it anyway? It's because it's possible, right? Anything that's possible and profitable is probable to happen. And some people actually said that we were trying to prove a point rather than to build something, which is definitely not the case. We just designed for tendency. But after seeing that the community reacted this strongly, we said no. But probably the most interesting point, which was mentioned by, I think, one or two people, was that this is essentially a subjectivity attack. I think Vitalik from the Ethereum team wrote a blog post about this, about subjectivity and blockchains. This is, I think, going to become the primary problem of almost all blockchains out there in the future, because which blockchain fork is the right one essentially depends on your client's subjectivity and to which chain you actually listen to. So future attacks could actually include the clients or the wallets deciding on a specific fork, regardless of whether the fork is bigger or smaller. And this is something I think the community needs to discuss really in the future, not just BitShares, but the whole blockchain community. So
sure.
We didn't want to be the guys to screw up the whole system, so we said, okay, let's not do that.
Sure. And you know, this brings up some issues that we could get into an entire discussion on this subjectivity, right? And perhaps we should, in the future, consider doing so. And I would invite you to come on and talk about it if we were to. But for the time being, let's get back to the delegates' proposal and the hard coding, because I was reading the forum posts, and it was really interesting to watch it unfold. And I would say, personally, and I don't know where everybody else who's here stands, of course, please speak up or type in your question or your comments, and I'll make sure that people are made aware of them. However, the question that would come to mind that would be a potential concern to me would be that if a wallet has these delegates hard-coded, what would be keeping someone from breaking the promise of turning those delegates off after you gain substantial user base? If your wallet is really that good, it's got the first mover advantage in a space where everyone's using it and it's just so good. It's a very high quality wallet. Everybody's used to using it now. They're in a habit of using it. They're comfortable with using it. Now it's a very big barrier to entry for other wallets, potentially, correct? So what would keep people from moving out of that wallet? It's the same. We see the same thing with Facebook, right? Sure, Facebook tracks us. It steals all of our information and sells them to third parties without giving us a cut in the profit. There's a number of things that people don't like about Facebook, and there are plenty of alternatives. Like, for instance, maybe Diaspora would be a good example where people could actually make money off. They could monetize their information, but you just don't see them moving, right?
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on this in respect to that?
This is really one of the reasons why we almost desperately want this to be as open source as possible. Because if this is truly open source from the beginning, also for profit, then if people don't like the management or the company behind it, then they can just fork it and create another one, right? Without encountering the network effect that much. It's not like Facebook where, the business model magic of Facebook isn't their user interface, it's that they own your social graph. With BitShares, nobody owns your social graph as long as you have, social graph, I guess your money graph, as long as you hold your own private keys and nobody holds them for you. So as long as we reach our goal of open source, the risk is definitely to a great extent mitigated to become the next Facebook. But the long-term risk, the tendency is still there, not for us, but really for anybody in this space. Because what if Coinbase becomes a de facto BitShares wallet in the future where they hold your private keys, right?
Yeah.
That's going to be the real problem in the future, I think.
Well, thank you for answering. This is kind of at the heart of what really caused a lot of the discussion, right? So, to me, it was a very important topic to bring up, and it's important to get other people's feedback on it. So, I kind of do a call to action during these hangouts to inform everybody that, if you have a question or your own opinion on this topic, feel free to speak up.
Yeah.
Okay, with that said, BTS Wildpig did ask a question in text here. He says, if big holders like Bytemaster are using a traditional wallet, only small holders are using your wallet, how will this opt-out voting function help your delegate get to 101?
Well, we're trying to design it in such a way that the big holders will also be interested in using our wallet. The primary way we want to do this is by integrating with external exchanges. So our long-term business model is becoming a on-blockchain certificate authority for external exchange whitelisting. But the external exchanges, when they issue their gateway user-issued assets, they need a whitelisting feature in order to control for where their money goes to for legal purposes. And the dev shares, I think, almost got it now. It's almost there. But it still needs some sort of certificate authority for these external exchanges to do the identity verification a lot faster. And that's our long-term business model. So we think that everything but the core business model should be open source, which means that we can essentially make our entire wallet and everything open source except for the identity verification module. And as long as people need a lot of liquidity at hand to trade with external exchanges, which we assume is going to be a lot of people for a long time until BitShares really becomes big. There's going to be a big reason for people to have their funds at least on cold storage with our wallet.
You say
could you repeat that, Fuzz? I didn't hear you.
You said that you mentioned cold storage with your wallet. How does that work?
The same way it already does with the current BitShares command line interface, actually. The only difference is that you don't hold the private keys to that that particular amount in your browser or in your app, but you can still vote for it. Right? That's essentially how the delegates are currently doing their stuff without actually having to hold their funds on their delegate server. It's the same setup as with the delegates.
Gotcha.
I had a question. Are you going to be launching with any exchange integration? So are you partnering with any exchanges to provide that right at the beginning?
We're talking to a lot of exchanges, actually, so far. And I guess you know probably most of them, but at this point I can't talk about it in particular, but most of them are now pretty interested. The thing is that it's not as difficult to build the wallet side of things as much as it is the integration side of things for the exchanges, because they all have different exchange, software and engines. And if they want to integrate, you essentially have to do a custom job for every single one of them. So that's currently a hurdle which we're thinking about how to solve. So yes, we're talking to exchanges, and we really hope that within the next 6 months or so, at least one or two of them will come on board.
Okay, cool, thanks. Another thing I was curious about is if you had any mobile port of your wallet planned for the future?
So the design we're using is mobile ready, but it isn't mobile optimized. So we're using the Google Material Design Guidelines to build the application. And it's portable, it's in Angular, so if you really, really wanted to, you could use the same application on the mobile even now with PhoneGap or something, but it would be a very bad experience just because it would be too buggy. But in terms of design, we could pretty easily port it. When it comes to the mobile clients, for this version, we're doing the transaction building on the front end in the Angular app, just so the server has less control. However, we believe that in the future, we'll probably have to change the setup similar to how Copay, the BitPay wallet, had to do it, where the transaction is built on the server and verified on the client. This is to make more complex transactions possible and multi-signature transactions. And if we do that, so once we change the server side of things for version 2 or so, then you could easily use it for not just mobile wallets, for really any kind of client which wants to have access to any kind of DPoS DAC. So one thing I think about sometimes is, we work with the PeerTracks guys. What if iTunes wants to integrate with the DAC but doesn't want to have, iTunes create transaction signatures? Then the already created transaction is just sent to iTunes, and iTunes just signs it with a private key and sends it back. And you as a server can't really, change anything about the transaction. The same thing could be done with, let's say, BitShares Play, where a game is integrated with a DAC, and instead of downloading the entire blockchain or even creating specific transaction operations in the game, just the already built specific transaction is sent to the game, and you just sign with the private key automatically. So this really would increase the horizon of what DACs can do in the future.
Interesting stuff. Thanks.
Thanks.
So how do you foresee this working with gateways?
Could you specify the question a bit more?
Well, you're talking about enabling simply transactions to go through by a cryptographic signature, right? Do you see this being applicable to gateways, like, for instance, the Meta Exchange or something to that effect?
As far as I know, Meta Exchange isn't a gateway, it's a bridge, right?
Oh, yeah, my apologies. Yeah, it is. But we are going to be moving into the realm of gateways, right? Like where I can provide my own gateway service that almost, as I see them, it's almost like a 2.0 version of local bitcoins where it's no longer necessarily geographically local, right? It's almost like a web of trust thing where my IOUs for a certain token have value based on whether there's a chance that people will actually be able to redeem them for the actual token, correct?
Yes, we think so.
So is this functionality going to apply to me if I want to someday run a gateway?
Well, if you're a gateway and you issue your gateway tokens and somebody holds them, any kind of light client server would just create a transaction on the server and send it to your client to sign. So it's really the same setup. You, again, wouldn't need the whole blockchain or anything.
Oh, okay. So you guys are really... this is interesting because this is an area where I'm personally learning a little bit myself. So you're saying that the gateways themselves would be offering very similar functionality to what you guys with your Moonstone wallet will be offering.
Well, I might have put it wrongly. So right now, what exchanges do is they are three business models in one. One is they do KYC, so they do identity verification, which generally takes a week to 3 weeks, depending on what exchange you are on, if you're dealing with fiat. The second one is they have their order book and their order book engine. And the third one is they comply with all the legal stuff in their specific jurisdiction. Where we see things heading in the future is that this exchange model will be unbundled, meaning these three functions will be split into probably 2 or 3 different companies or entities, where the identity verification will be done by one company, which we hope will be Bitsapphire/Moonstone in the future. Whereas you send in the all the documentation you would need to verify yourself within a specific jurisdiction. And if you want to sign up to a specific gateway, you just click, like on Facebook, sign up with Moonstone. And that exchange would essentially trust us contractually that we have already verified your ID. So within a second, you would be able to start trading gateway IOUs on that specific gateway. The second business model of the exchanges, which is the order book, we believe most of it will move to the blockchain itself. Or part of it for the high frequency trading will remain on the exchanges with high risk. And BitShares will effectively become a dealer between all exchange order books, which is more likely, I think. So if you look at the exchange engine on BitShares, it essentially already is a dealer. It's not an exchange per se, because you can't do front running and that kind of stuff. So therefore, in a way, it's not a true exchange, it's a dealer, which is actually a positive, I think. And the third one, which is complying with local jurisdiction, that's going to become the primary business model of these exchanges in order to become gateways. And therefore, the total cost of starting to become, a gateway is going to be a lot lower in the BitShares ecosystem than, let's say, with Bitcoin. Because you don't need to build all 3 parts, you just have to comply with local jurisdictions. And don't do anything else. So it's a lot cheap. It's going to be a lot cheaper, and that's probably going to be their primary business model in the future.
So it's very interesting that you bring this up, because what we're dealing with right now with the current banking infrastructure in Wall Street and all these different exchanges, right, is we're seeing there used to be legal framework that got in the way of these banking institutions betting with people's money in the derivatives markets, say. So this effectively allows BitShares, allows the blockchain to protect the user's funds from being having to take the risk of high risk trading, and essentially forces people who want to do that trading to do so through more centralized and higher risk services by protocol, as opposed to a law.
Exactly, and this actually ties in with our analysis of blockchains here. We see that there's so there's some projects out there, some silos, which say that there can only be one blockchain, and some others who say let 1,000 blockchains bloom. What we think is that you have to analyze this in terms of added value, in terms of a market, right? People only use anything if there's added value to them using it, and it only exists if there is somehow a win-win situation constructed, right? The person or entity offering the service, the added value, and the person, the user using the added value, both need to have perceived, perceived higher value than if not using it or using a different solution. Therefore, this all needs to be analyzed in a free market environment, or at least semi-free market environment. If you look at it that way, then you have to understand what the added value of blockchains are in the first place. I think very few people are discussing this. I think now we're way off the original Moonstone discussion, but it's still pretty important. So the way we analyzed it is that blockchains have only a single added value. Literally, there's only one thing which makes blockchains interesting, and that is lowered counterparty risk. I mean, people need to engrave this somehow in their memory, lower counterparty risk. If you deal with PayPal, they might be technically decentralized. I mean, they might come up with a next protocol where they have 100,000 servers out there, but they will always be politically centralized, right? Regardless of how decentralized technically any system is, the important part is the political decentralization or centralization. And so why is PayPal so bad, or why is the existing system so bad, is because the ledgers or the databases, even if they were transparent, are politically centralized. There's a single subjectivity, a single person or entity in charge of what is true and what is not. And the blockchain solves that by decentralization, by decentralizing the politics. And the more heterogeneous the politics are, like the less individual, the less proportional power any particular entity or individual has on the blockchain's consensus or execution, the lower the total counterparty risk of the correct execution of any transaction, right? And that is the most important thing any blockchain can do. So if we understand this, we understand that there's a spectrum between full centralization and complete decentralization in terms of politics. Full centralization would be PayPal. Complete decentralization, I think, still doesn't exist, because game theoretically you need, well, I'm not going to get too much into it, but you need some sort of universal utility value where everybody has an equal interest in it, which in Bitcoin is modeled through turning the consensus through game theory into economics, where your utility value is measured in terms of dollars of Bitcoin. coin or whatever, which doesn't capture it quite perfectly. Tokenization, I think they call it. With BitShares, you essentially have tokenization, but also actual shares, like in a company. So the BitShares model is the in-between model between complete centralization and the still non-existent public utility function of a blockchain. So DPoS is literally a company. It's not a public utility. It's not a government. It is a company. And as long as there is a company, you can have 1,000 different blockchains with different decentralization of politics and different consensus and different utility values to different industries and people, each having low counterparty risk for the consensus participants. However, they can add on top of it some sort of business logic or added value, like let's say BitShares Music does for the music industry, or BitShares Play does for the gaming industry, or the SKU chain does for the shipment and tracking industry, right? And the overall focal point or game theoretical focal point or Schelling point or whatever you want to call it of the industry become that DAG by default, instead of using, let's say, a centralized database of Amazon, because it has the lower counterparty risk. And I think that's where it's going to go. You'll see industry-specific blockchains which are politically relatively decentralized, which are probably going to be primarily owned in terms of shares by the biggest players, but none of which trusts one another, or they are all in different countries and jurisdictions, but they still need a way to execute contracts for their specific industry.
Sure, and there was a reason why I was actually bringing this up. I don't think it's that far off from the discussion because, like I said, right, people are learning. All of the people who are coming on here who are developing these amazing utilities, projects, and products are doing a lot of research into how to best do this. And this being an open source movement, it requires you to know a lot about how to go about doing it. And that knowledge is very helpful for others, right? And the interesting thing is that you're wanting to, you've mentioned early on that you feel that it's vital that your project becomes, gets an MIT license. So I'm kind of curious how this fits in and what into this equation that we're kind of talking about here, and why that's valuable.
The less you have public goods all around the DAG, about industries on top which can work on top of the DAG, like startups utilizing BitShares, the less you have public goods in that sphere, the more you'll have silos. And the more silos you have of technology and solutions, the more fragmented the system is. And therefore, the smaller a player can be in order to control the game theoretic focal point. That means that if everybody does their own small solution, then somebody might come up and become the next Coinbase of BitShares or whatever, or Coinbase itself accepts it in the future, which I doubt, considering their stance on this stuff. And even just by being a 10% player, they could still completely steer the fate of BitShares. But if there is a public good solution out there, which is good enough at the very least, then regardless of how big the other closed source player is, the marginal utility for every other player to use the open source version is so great that they instead use it. It's kind of the same setup why the internet servers of the world run on Linux rather than Microsoft, even though Microsoft puts in so much money. Because, it was there in the early beginning, and therefore everybody can use it. But Microsoft pretty much gives out their service for free to anybody just so they can get into the market in the server industry, simply because otherwise their marginal cost would be too high. But if Linux wouldn't have been in the right time, in the right place, then you can bet that Microsoft would charge thousands and thousands of dollars for every single server in the world. And as a result, you wouldn't have that many internet startups and therefore as much public value all around the world.
So essentially what you're saying is it's valuable to reach this goal of $130,000 to reach this MIT licensure for the same reason why it was valuable to have the Linux kernel in the first place.
Yeah.
And you know, I'm glad that you came on here today, because these are the types of things that, you know, in an hour here we can really talk about these things, and this is something that we didn't get into in the forums, right? This isn't something that we could have really delved quite so deeply into in an easily transferable way that people who don't have time to read the forums could have learned this from you. So I appreciate you coming on here and explaining it to me, because that just this little piece that you talked about right here gives me goosebumps. You know, I mean, this is the type of stuff that really empowers people, right? And it kind of, yeah, I'm almost speechless for once. With that said, BTS Wildpig has one more thing he wants to ask here. When you have the time, would it be possible to make a table that has two sides to compare the traditional wallet and your wallet? You can make so that so it will be easier for people to see what your wallet can do compared to the original one. Each wallet's advantages and disadvantages on the same table. Would this be possible?
Sounds awesome. I'm writing it down immediately.
Thank you very much. And I know that I've asked a lot of questions, and this is the reason why I generally will ask everybody if they have a question a few times throughout these Hangouts, because I don't want people thinking that I'm just trying to ask my own questions, because as you can see, I have plenty of them. Does anybody else have a question for itnom before we close this Hangout?
I've got a question. It's a little bit off topic here, but as we are closing this out, I guess it's appropriate. The BitShares Talk forum has, each user has a profile. These profiles are pretty, there's not a lot of fields to enter information. You know, they're very basic. I'm curious as to, you know, this kind of goes along with segues from the political discussion, the ideas of, you know, the ways that the subjectivity and how these things are influenced. I'm wondering if it would be beneficial to add a number of different fields that people can enter information into in order to create a little more rounded personal profiles for, you know, obviously purposes of, you know, having a place where everyone can learn a little bit more about each other. You know, of course, on a voluntary basis. But I was thinking, you know, take a cue from what Facebook has in their standard sort of static profile, right? You've got interests and hobbies, professional skills, you know, relationship status. I mean, we could go through a number of different, you know, maybe types of potential fields of information. So yeah, I'm curious, is this something, I wasn't imagining that this would be too difficult for you guys to add as a feature to the BitShares Talk website?
No, I think we can do that. It actually sounds like a good idea. We just didn't think about it.
Okay, well, yeah, that's great. What I'm going to do actually is I'll start a forum thread and kind of get some people's ideas as to what how they want to flesh that out. You know, maybe what the specific you know, headers of the field should be, and you know, we can kind of come to a consensus about what we all want. And yeah, awesome, thank you.
Sure. Let's start out with Thread. We'll propose form software plugin mod and start out with that, and then see how people react, whether they like it or not, and then gather whether they want to add any more fields or not.
Great. Awesome. Thank you.
And before I let you go, while we're recording, after editing, this will still be slightly under an hour, so we don't have to worry too much about going over by a few minutes. Are there any places that people can get in touch with you if they have questions or comments that they would like to share with you, or if they would like to get a little bit more information about the project? Do you have like a newsletter or a website that people could go to? Itnom, are you there? Calling all itnoms. Calling all itnoms. Please move to the front of the bus.
Yeah, here I am.
Okay.
Since when am I on mute?
It's okay, brother. We can edit it all out.
Okay, so if you want to talk privately, it's taulant@bitsapphire.com, taulant@bitsapphire.com. I just wrote it in the chat section. If you want to follow up either on the forum or on moonstone.io, I think they just put up the website today, but we still need to fix something about the CSS, I think. And the mailing list will be up tomorrow. We're also thinking about putting up a mailing list box on the forum itself, but we'll see how the community reacts to that.
Sure. And I will let you know that I am very interested in covering anybody who wants to use your open source wallet to create their own. I would really like to cover the history of everything that's going on in the BitShares ecosystem, and I'd like to have the community kind of there with us, you know what I mean? We are making history here. This is amazing that we're here, and most people are, we get impatient sometimes, we forget, I think we sometimes think, we want to be rich, and we forget sometimes exactly what we're doing and how amazing it is that we are here doing this together. So please feel free to let people know if they want to come on here and meet up with the community and talk about their projects and what they're working on with you in conjunction with you, that we would love to have them.
Yeah, sounds awesome. We definitely want to have as many people try it out in the next few weeks as possible. We're still in the marketing phase. We want to build as much buzz as possible. And yeah, I'll definitely be on the Mumble Talks a lot more often now. And it's probably going to take at least 1 more month, maybe, and 1.5 months to start the fundraiser. We want to have the wallet ready before we do the fundraiser itself. Just so people, have an actual finished product which they can look up on.
Awesome. Well, for anybody who's listening to the end of this, if you would like to continue seeing these hangouts posted to our forums and to the website, please consider voting for Fuzzy.Beyond Bitcoin's delegate so we can fund the little team that we have going through organizing these hangouts and editing them for anyone in an open source manner to cover and post press releases or news stories based on them. So with that said, thank you everybody for attending, and I'm going to shut this one down starting now.